Manhattan, Upper East Side penthouse worth $15 million, a scene destined to shatter the foundations of a family built on appearances. Christopher Sterling, tech industry magnate, came home early from his Wall Street office to find his wife Victoria accusing Maria, their Mexican housekeeper, of stealing a $100,000 Tiffany bracelet. But what the security cameras revealed paralyzed him. Victoria had violently pushed Nathan, their 8-year-old son with Down syndrome, causing him to fall onto the shards of a Qing dynasty vase. Maria had intervened, taking a slap meant for the terrified child. The most shocking truth emerged from files discovered on Maria's laptop. She wasn't just a simple maid, but Dr. Maria Gonzalez-Rivera, internationally renowned child neuropsychiatrist, who had fled Mexico to protect her daughter from a cartel-connected ex-husband. For 3 years, she had secretly transformed Nathan from a non-verbal child into a hidden genius, while scrubbing floors and enduring daily humiliations. The reason? Pure love for a child everyone else considered a burden to eliminate. The Sterling penthouse rose above Manhattan like a monument to gilded indifference. 6,000 square feet, where Italian marble reflected the cold light of lives built on surface. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park below, while inside, art worth millions decorated walls that had never heard genuine laughter. In this sanctuary of privilege, tragedy consumed itself daily in the complicit silence of those who preferred not to see. Christopher Sterling had built his tech empire with the same meticulousness with which he had constructed his public image. Successful entrepreneur, husband to one of New York's most beautiful women, father to— this was the sore point he tried to ignore by immersing himself ever deeper in work. Nathan, 8 years old, blue eyes that looked at the world with a purity that Down syndrome made even more crystalline, was the imperfection in his perfect world. That November afternoon, something had compelled him to cancel the video conference with Shanghai and return home. Perhaps it had been Nathan's voice message that morning, those simple words charged with joy he had listened to distractedly. The boy spoke of stars and Maria, the Mexican housekeeper who, for 3 years, had taken care of the house, and, increasingly often, of Nathan himself. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse, and the scene that greeted him burned into his retina like a brand. Victoria Hamilton Sterling, former model-turned-trophy wife, towered in her artificial perfection over 2 huddled figures. Her white Chanel suit was as immaculate as her conscience was dirty. Platinum blonde hair pulled into a chignon that accentuated the hardness of her Botoxed face. Beneath her, Maria Gonzalez, as she called herself, protected Nathan with her own body, forming a human shield between the child and his mother's fury. The floor told a story of violence, fragments of Qing porcelain scattered like fallen stars, some stained with blood flowing from Nathan's knee. The child sobbed with that particular cry of special children, when the world becomes too chaotic, too violent, too incomprehensible. His hands clutched Maria's apron, as if it were the only solid thing in a collapsing universe. Maria, 42 years worn with the dignity of one who has seen too much but never stopped hoping, cradled the child, whispering something in a language Christopher initially took for common Spanish, but which had a different cadence, more educated, more structured. Her hands, cracked from detergents and work, stroked Nathan's hair with a tenderness Christopher had never seen even in Victoria toward their son. The penthouse itself seemed divided into 2 worlds. Victoria's sterile and perfect one, where every object had a price but no value, and the hidden corners where Maria had created small oases for Nathan. Only now did Christopher notice his son's drawings taped behind the curtains, colored blocks strategically placed where the child could reach them, picture books hidden under the designer sofa cushions. The wife turned, hearing the elevator, and her face instantly recomposed into that mask of controlled indignation she had perfected over years of social performances. Words began flowing from her mouth like a well-studied script. The maid had stolen the Tiffany bracelet. Nathan had destroyed a $200,000 vase. The situation was unbearable. Drastic measures needed to be taken. Each sentence was calibrated to paint herself as victim, and the others as guilty. But Christopher wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on a detail others would have ignored: the way Nathan, usually terrified by conflicts, progressively calmed in Maria's arms. It wasn't just physical comfort. There was something deeper, a connection that went beyond simple caregiving. The child whom therapists at $500 an hour defined as barely manageable seemed to find in this humble woman a safe harbor that not even medication could guarantee. The truth was composing itself before his eyes, like a puzzle that had always had all the pieces, but only now found its shape. Maria wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the only person in that house who saw Nathan as a complete human being, not as a problem to solve or hide. The security footage painted a picture of systematic cruelty that Christopher had willfully ignored for years. Victoria locking Nathan in his room during important dinners because he would ruin the atmosphere. Victoria on the phone with her Hamptons friends discussing permanent solutions for their problem. Victoria, who had already researched facilities in Switzerland specializing in the long-term care of children with disabilities, places that were essentially luxurious prisons where inconvenient children disappeared from their families' lives. The $300,000 security system Christopher had installed to protect his art collection became that evening the silent witness to a truth he would have preferred not to discover. While Victoria continued her performance and Maria remained silent, embracing Nathan, Christopher opened the app on his phone with slightly trembling fingers. The high-definition images told a story that had been unfolding for months, perhaps years, under his distracted nose. 15 minutes before his arrival, Nathan had been sitting at the kitchen table, completely absorbed in what appeared to be a complex three-dimensional puzzle. Maria was beside him, not simply supervising, but guiding him with precise hand movements, as if teaching a secret language only the two of them understood. The child was serene, concentrated, even smiling, an expression Christopher realized with a chest pain he rarely saw. Then Victoria had entered like a storm, phone glued to her ear while complaining to some friend from the yacht club. Her words, captured clearly by the audio system, were daggers Christopher had never wanted to hear. She spoke of Nathan as the problem, discussed options to get rid of him, mentioned a Swiss institute specializing in difficult cases. The boy, with that acute sensitivity often accompanying his condition, had perceived the hostility in the air. He had begun rocking, a clear signal of anxiety Christopher now recognized, but had always ignored. In an instinctive attempt to distance himself from the source of stress, Nathan had stood too quickly, bumping the side table on which the Ching vase rested. Victoria's reaction had been disproportionate and violent. She had grabbed Nathan's arm with such force that the child fell onto the shards, his knee opening in a cut that would require stitches. But it wasn't over. Victoria had raised her hand to strike him, her face distorted by a rage that went far beyond a broken vase. Maria had appeared from nowhere, placing herself between mother and son with the speed of one who has spent a lifetime protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The slap meant for Nathan had imprinted on her cheek, leaving a red mark the camera captured in pitiless detail. But Maria hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. She had only taken Nathan and moved him away from danger, beginning that lullaby in Spanish that seemed to have magical powers over the child. Christopher continued watching, rewinding days, weeks, months. A pattern emerged with devastating clarity. Maria transforming every moment with Nathan into a lesson disguised as play. Victoria systematically excluding and humiliating the child. And he, Christopher, magnificently absent, always at the office, always traveling, always elsewhere. The hours that followed saw the controlled collapse of a marriage that had been more business contract than union of love. Victoria left the penthouse that same evening after Christopher showed her a montage of all her recorded abuses, accompanied by the veiled threat of making the material public if she made trouble about the divorce. The woman who had always calculated every move understood she was checkmated and accepted a generous settlement in exchange for silence and renunciation of all rights to Nathan. With the apartment finally quiet and Nathan asleep after a private doctor had treated his knee, Christopher sat with Maria in the kitchen that had become the real heart of the home. The woman tried to minimize, to get up to prepare something, anything to avoid this conversation. But Christopher insisted, and slowly, like a river finally finding its course, the truth emerged. Maria Gonzalez-Rivera, her real name, was 42 years old, with a life that seemed drawn from a novel. Graduated summa cum laude in child neuropsychiatry from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, she had completed her specialization at Johns Hopkins with a revolutionary thesis on treating children with Down syndrome and hidden cognitive abilities. She had been considered one of the most brilliant minds in her field, invited to international conferences, author of papers still being cited. Then she had made the mistake of falling in love with and marrying Carlos Mendoza, a businessman with cartel connections who had initially fascinated her with his charisma but revealed himself to be a monster. When she tried to leave him after years of psychological and physical abuse, he had sworn to kill her and their daughter Sophia. The escape had been planned for months. False documents, a journey across the border, arrival in New York, where a distant cousin had helped her create a new identity. Maria Gonzalez, Mexican housekeeper, was the price to pay for her and Sophia's safety. She had accepted the job with the Sterlings because it paid enough for a small apartment in Queens, and Sophia's school fees, who at 11 already showed extraordinary intelligence, inherited from her mother. But then she had met Nathan. Where everyone saw limits, she saw potential. Where others saw delay, she saw a mind that simply processed the world differently. She had started with small experiments. The colored blocks weren't toys, but specific cognitive tools she had ordered with her last savings. The Spanish lullabies were actually emotional regulation exercises based on rhythm and repetition. Even the way she organized the child's day followed therapeutic protocols she had developed years earlier at Johns Hopkins. In 3 years of silent and invisible work, while cleaning bathrooms and ironing shirts, she had transformed Nathan. The child who could barely say a few words could now communicate in complete sentences. The little one who couldn't concentrate for more than a minute now spent hours on increasingly complex puzzles. The son everyone considered irredeemable was showing mathematical and spatial abilities that Maria suspected were symptoms of that rare condition known as savant syndrome. Christopher spent the sleepless night reviewing years of willful blindness through the recordings. Scenes his brain had filed as irrelevant now revealed themselves as crucial. Maria preparing Nathan's breakfast every morning, transforming it into a lesson on colors and shapes. Maria singing songs during cleaning that were actually memory exercises. Maria, who had transformed bath time into improvised aquatic therapy. But there were also the dark scenes he had chosen not to see. Victoria locking Nathan in his room during important dinners. Victoria telling friends on the phone she was considering solving the problem, definitively. Victoria, who had already contacted clinics in Switzerland specializing in the permanent admission of children with disabilities.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
The legal confrontation that followed was swift and ruthless. Christopher's lawyers presented a dossier that included not only recordings of abuse, but also evidence of Victoria's research on institutions, her conversations with compliant doctors, willing to sign certificates of unmanageability, even money transfers to a Swiss account in her name only, evidently preparing her escape after settling Nathan. Victoria, cornered, attempted one last maneuver accusing Maria of being an illegal immigrant who had seduced Christopher to obtain documents. It was then that Christopher revealed he had already verified Maria's past, confirming not only her identity but also the death threats documented by Mexican police against her and Sophia. The divorce was finalized in record time. Victoria got $20 million and a house in the Hamptons in exchange for total renunciation of Nathan and perpetual silence about the matter. Before leaving the penthouse definitively, Victoria cast one last glance at the son she had never really wanted. Nathan was on the couch with Maria, completely absorbed in a picture book the woman was reading to him. He didn't even look up when his biological mother left his life forever. The months that followed saw a transformation of the penthouse that went far beyond the physical aspect. Out went the minimalist furniture with dangerous edges, replaced by soft and functional furnishings. Out went the untouchable artworks, replaced by blackboard walls where Nathan could express himself freely. But the deepest transformation was in the people inhabiting that space. Christopher, freed from the weight of a toxic marriage, discovered his son for the first time. Guided by Maria, who had agreed to stay as Nathan's official therapist with a salary finally adequate to her skills, he learned to enter the child's world instead of demanding that Nathan adapt to his. He discovered that his son had extraordinary visual memory, could remember the position of hundreds of objects after seeing them once, solved complex puzzles with speed that left people stunned. Sophia, Maria's daughter, moved into the penthouse with her mother. At 11, with inherited sharp intelligence and maturity forced by circumstances, she became Nathan's best friend and protector. The two children developed their own language, made of gestures, drawings, and invented words. Sophia translated the world to Nathan, and Nathan showed Sophia perspectives her brilliant but conventional mind would never have considered. It was during one of these play study sessions that Christopher witnessed something extraordinary. Nathan was working with geometric blocks, apparently building randomly. Sophia was about to correct what seemed like an error when Maria stopped her. They watched in silence as the child completed the structure. It was a perfect three-dimensional representation of a complex mathematical formula that Maria recognized from an advanced topology paper. Confirmation came after a series of tests conducted privately by international specialists Maria knew from her academic years. Nathan wasn't just a child with Down syndrome, he was also a savant with mathematical and spatial abilities that manifested in unconventional ways. His brain processed patterns and structures at a level few adults could understand, but his condition made it difficult to communicate these insights traditionally. A year after Victoria's departure, the Upper East Side Penthouse hosted an event that redefined the very concept of family and success. It wasn't one of the superficial cocktail parties that once filled those rooms with empty chatter and false smiles, but the inauguration of something revolutionary. The World, according to Nathan, an interactive exhibition combining art, mathematics, and perception in ways that challenged conventions. The story had circulated not only through American media, but the international scientific community. The child whom New York high society had labeled the Stirling problem had created three-dimensional models of mathematical concepts that MIT professors were still trying to fully decipher. His constructions, which initially seemed random, had revealed themselves to be physical representations of complex equations, visualizations of higher dimensions made comprehensible in 3 dimensions. The exhibition had been Maria's idea, but the realization was a family project. Christopher had used his contacts to obtain the exhibition space at the Museum of Modern Art. Sophia had created the captions, translating Nathan's visual language into words visitors could understand. Maria had supervised the setup, ensuring every element was accessible and comprehensible, not only to experts, but also to children. On Inauguration Day, the penthouse filled with a heterogeneous crowd that would never have been seen in Victoria's time. There were mathematics professors alongside parents of children with special needs, avant-garde artists discussing with therapists, children playing while Nobel laureates observed Nathan's creations, fascinated. It was a crucible of humanity united by wonder before a mind that saw the world uniquely. Christopher observed the scene from a corner, still incredulous at how his life had changed. A year earlier, he had everything society considered success: money, a trophy wife, a penthouse featured in magazines. Now he had something infinitely more precious: a real family. He watched Maria guiding a group of visitors, explaining with contagious passion the techniques she had developed to unlock Nathan's potential. She was no longer the invisible maid, but a luminary in her field who had chosen love over career. Nathan was at the center of everything, no longer hidden or ignored, but celebrated for what he was: an extraordinary child with a unique perspective on the world. With Sophia's help, he showed visitors how to build his structures, guiding their hands with infinite patience. When a younger child, also with Down syndrome, approached timidly, Nathan took his hand and led him to his work table, sharing his blocks with the natural generosity of one who has finally found his place in the world. The evening reached its peak when Professor Yamamoto, world-renowned mathematician who had come specially from Harvard, announced that one of Nathan's structures had solved a visualization problem his team had been working on for years. It wasn't just art or mathematical curiosity. It was a genuine contribution to the field of applied topology. The room exploded in applause that made Nathan smile with that pure joy only he could express. Later, when the guests had left and the penthouse returned to quiet, the family gathered on the terrace overlooking Manhattan. The city lights sparkled below them like an earthly constellation, while in the sky the real stars began showing themselves timidly. Nathan sat between Christopher and Maria, with Sophia leaning against his back, all wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. It was in that moment that Christopher made the proposal he had been contemplating for weeks. He turned to Maria with a simplicity that would have astonished anyone who had known him in the Victoria era. There were no knees on the ground or $100,000 rings, just sincere words about how she had saved not only Nathan, but his entire existence, that Sophia was already the daughter he never knew he wanted, that he wanted to make official what already existed in the heart. They were a family. Maria responded with silent tears and a whispered yes. Nathan, who had understood in his own way, hugged both parents while Sophia cheered, promising to be the best maid of honor in history. The wedding, 6 months later, was an intimate celebration on the same terrace. No paparazzi, no New York society, only the people who truly mattered. Some of Maria's colleagues from abroad, old friends of Christopher who had accepted his life's new configuration, and especially the children from the center Maria had opened for children with special needs. The center, funded by Christopher but entirely managed by Maria, had become a reference point in America for its innovative approach to developmental disorders. It wasn't called Sterling Center or some other high-sounding name, but simply Nathan's House, because, as Maria said, every special child deserved a home where they could simply be themselves. Years passed, bringing successes no one could have predicted. Nathan, now a teenager, had become an unofficial consultant for research teams worldwide, his unique visualizations helping solve complex problems in fields ranging from architecture to theoretical physics. Sophia had graduated from medical school with a specialization in neuroscience, determined to scientifically understand what her mother had intuited through experience. Christopher had transformed part of his company into a foundation dedicated to research and support for families with special children. But true success was measured in everyday moments. In the evenings when all four sat around the kitchen table, that same table where Maria had begun transforming Nathan. In the mornings when Christopher drove the kids to school, listening to their chatter about worlds only they could fully see. In the afternoons when Maria received letters from parents worldwide, thanking her for showing them that special wasn't a sentence, but a possibility. The last chapter of this story was written years later, when Nathan, now 20, gave his first lecture at Columbia University. With the help of a communication system developed by Sophia, he explained his theory on multidimensional visualization to an audience of fascinated academics. At the end, when asked what had inspired him, Nathan pointed to Maria and Christopher sitting in the front row, and, with the clarity he had achieved through years of work, simply said, "Love sees beyond." Victoria, from her golden villa in the Hamptons, saw the video of the lecture that had gone viral. For a moment, just a moment, she wondered what could have been if she had seen beyond the surface, beyond her vanity, beyond her prejudices. But it was a question without answer, because some people are destined to live in the golden prisons they build for themselves. Meanwhile, in the Upper East Side penthouse that now regularly hosted workshops for families with special children, Maria prepared dinner while Christopher helped Nathan with a new project, and Sophia studied for her specialization exam. It was a normal domestic scene, banal even, yet it contained more wealth than all the millions in Christopher's bank accounts. Because in the end, the story of the millionaire who discovered the maid protecting his son wasn't a story of social class or revealed secrets. It was the story of how true love needs no titles or diplomas to manifest itself, of how one woman's courage can save not just a child, but an entire family, and of how sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in the most ordinary places, waiting only for someone to have the eyes to see them. The circle closed definitively when, years later, a young Mexican researcher presented himself at Nathan's house. He was the son of Carlos Mendoza, come to ask forgiveness for his father's crimes, and to thank Maria for having transformed her escape into a gift for the world. Maria embraced him because she had learned that forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but frees the future. And in that embrace, before Nathan, who smiled with his silent wisdom, the last act of a story that began with violence and fear, but ended with love and acceptance, was fulfilled. The true miracle wasn't the discovery of Nathan's genius or Maria's redemption of her past. It was the transformation of four broken people into a family that proved love could transcend any boundary society tried to impose. In the city that never sleeps, they had found peace. In the place where appearances meant everything, they had found authenticity. And in a penthouse that had once been a golden prison, they had built a home where special wasn't a limitation, but a celebration of human diversity in all its forms. Hit like if you believe true love sees beyond appearances and labels. Comment with the moment that touched your heart. Share with someone who needs to know that special isn't a defect, but a gift. Subscribe for more stories that prove the humblest people can be the greatest heroes.